first phase of the Seattle Rescue Plan, over $128 million will be flexible funding from the federal government going towards the economic recovery of our city, but focused deeply on equity.
So you're hearing right there from Mayor Jenny Durkin talking about the focus of the Seattle Rescue Plan, the city's plan on how to spend federal COVID relief money that's coming in. We're starting to see that take shape here at the start of June. What is happening with that funding? What's next for Compassion Seattle, that ballot measure that's focused on homelessness and the city charter? And how is Seattle's approach to vaccinations during the pandemic changing? We're going to answer those questions. We're going to throw down the jam till the girls say when. It's all happening this week on Seattle News, Views, and Brews, your political podcast here. And I wanted to tell you, Brian Callanan here, a host on Seattle Channel. The views expressed here are my own. I'm recording this remotely in the fair city of Milwaukee, Wisconsin. I'm visiting some family for a high school graduation out here. My co-host, Kevin Schofield of Seattle City Council Insight, he's keeping watch in the Emerald City while I am out. Kevin, just please keep things under control until I get back. And do you need any cheese products or anything like that?
I was going to say, this is a pretty cheesy opening.
Yeah. I knew it. I got the brewer's cap on and everything, man. I'm trying my best here. A big thanks to City Grind Espresso, too. That, of course, is our background noise sponsor for the audio podcast. Please support them. Pick up a gift card online. Thanks also to our patrons. No new patrons this week, but we will keep working at it. And our mugshot of the week, the return of show intern Rob, once again coming through, said his coffee mug turned its handle in disdain as he interrupted puzzle time. Wow, artistic direction and A+ on this one. Thank you so much, Rob. If you would like to support the show, please do that. Get your photographic genius featured on our program. We'd be much obliged for it. Please help us out on Patreon. You can get yourself check it out. Kevin's got the mug going on. $10 level. We're trying to get people in there so we can send you a mug here. We'd love to have that sent your way. You can also see our show on Converge Media. I should point out, Converge runs the video version of our podcast on their YouTube channel Wednesday nights at 7. Let's get going with right here, right now. So here we are at the start of June. What is happening? This year is just flying by here. And we are talking about the Seattle Relief Plan, the Seattle City Council talking about this week. The city has about $240 million in federal funds, these ARPA funds, the American Relief Plan, coming in over the next 2 years. What's the plan for the first chunk of that? $128 million here in 2021. That's what the council is talking about this week. And Kevin, I want to talk with you about the 4 buckets of where this money is set to go. Housing and homelessness looks like it's getting the most there. Community projects, a strong second there. Small business recovery and also reopening city programs and services. What stood out for you with this plan?
Yeah, well, so it's interesting that, there's, it looks like these 4 buckets, and you start diving into it, you start to see it a different way, right? The biggest bucket, about $25 million is going to go towards direct aid. And that's going to be sort of cash help to, they're being a little vague as to who it's going to. It's going to be run by the Office of Immigrant and Refugee Affairs, who's run direct aid programs before.
Right.
Although they're saying it's going to go not just to immigrants and refugees, but probably a big chunk of it's going to go to them. But $28 million is going to go to help permanent housing. The state is getting an enormous amount of federal money to pump into affordable
so they could
housing.
Leverage that together.
So the city's looking to leverage that to get altogether about $90 million if they do it well, right?
Yeah.
About $14 million is going to go into reopening the city. They have to do some fixing up to some city offices and city facilities. They have to beef up their IT support in some places because they expect to be hybrid still for a while after that. And then all the rest of this money is going to get peanut buttered across a whole bunch of different things.
Yep.
You look through this, you see earmarks from the city council members. So, there's some money in there for childcare, which is a program that Council Member Mosqueda has been pushing for a long time.
Who just so happens to be running for office again.
Aid, the Immigrant and Refugee Direct Aid is a Gonzalez program. Stay Healthy Streets is a Strauss program. Gender-based violence programs is a Herbal program. That's all in there. Yeah. There's, lots of buckets. And that's not to say that any of this stuff is bad stuff to be spending money on.
Right.
But it is just, there's a lot of money which is just peanut buttered across a whole bunch of different programs. And you can sort of, not only can you see the fingers of the city council members in this, but you can also see all the the usual suspects of organizations that
Sure.
like asking the city for money.
Yeah,
And
yeah,
have come
yeah.
back and so what the city council and the mayor are really doing at some level on this is making sure everybody gets a little bit of money in, so
Yeah.
nobody can say, hey, we were completely ignored by
Yeah.
this. But
Right.
unfortunately, the side effect of this is there's no really big bets in this, right?
Yeah,
There's no big transformative thing that's going to
You
happen.
had mentioned that
You look at
transformative piece. Yeah.
yeah, you look at sort of the homeless the stuff in here. They're going to
Mhm.
add 130 more units of shelter space.
Right.
They're going to open up a safe lot for 25 RVs for people
Mm.
living in RVs.
Yeah.
It's like,
What's that gonna?
okay,
Yeah.
okay, but it's
Mhm.
like that's a drop in the bucket to what we're
Mhm.
dealing with. So nothing
Yeah.
big and transformative.
Yeah.
You know, it's a little disappointing. You would hope that with 128 million dollars, they'd go big. It's like
Yeah.
let's do something big and really, and
Yeah.
that's not really going to end
Yeah.
up being that.
And you mentioned too, transportation not really getting a lot of love on this one here. That was initially part of what the council was talking about when they were talking
Yeah.
about this money coming in back in March. And it doesn't look like transportation is going to get as much money as we might have originally thought here.
Yeah, and we'll see what happens when they talk it through. One of the things they said they were trying to do is align or maybe be complementary with what the county and the state are doing.
Mhm.
And I don't think the county's necessarily going to put more money in transportation, but the state might end up doing that.
Okay.
Some of their, like $900 million, something like that. They're getting a big chunk of money at the state level. So we may see some of that go into transportation, but not really at the city level.
Yeah, yeah. So that'll be a challenge, I know, going ahead, watching that money come out. This bill is in discussion on Tuesday, a public hearing coming up in Councilmember Mosqueda's Finance and Housing Committee on Friday. The hope is to have this plan approved for spending before the end of this month. All right, I'm going to look through the rest of the agenda for the council here this week at the start of June. An ordinance set for approval that would prevent interest from being charged on late utility payments through January of next year, a boost for ratepayers there. And what is this, Kevin? Early for football season, but it looks like the council is punting again on legislation about mobile homes, pushing this issue down the road another 6 months. Some background here, folks. We've talked about this before on the podcast. Seems like every 6 months or so. What to do with this moratorium the council passed in January of 2019 to protect the city's 2 mobile home parks from getting redeveloped and pushing those low income and or elderly residents out. Now, the council's been working on this mobile home park overlay district for the past couple of months. That's been appealed to the city hearing examiner. So here we are with a moratorium extension yet again. Kevin, this issue is a little bit of a mess. And I know we've talked about it before, and it might not seem like a big deal to a lot of people, but it's this very tricky effort of carving out a very specialized zoning overlay for mobile homes. How do you think this is going to play out?
Yeah, it's hard to say. So, like with any land use legislation the city council wants to pass, it has to go through the state EPA regulations, which means they have to look at it and either decide that it's make what they call a determination of non-significance.
Right.
It's not going to do anything to the environment, where environment is everything from business to a whole bunch of different stuff that goes into that thing.
Mm-hmm.
Or they have to do an analysis and say, here's what all the impacts are going to be.
Right.
That doesn't, even if it comes back and says there's going to be a whole bunch of negative impacts, that doesn't mean the city council can't do it.
Right.
It's just SEPA rules make sure that it's an informed decision that they're going to make.
Right.
But
right.
when they publish their SEPA analysis, whether it's a determination of non-significance or full-blown sort of analysis of the impacts, then that is subject to appeal. Anyone can appeal it, and then it automatically goes to the hearing examiner, and that takes months to kind of work its way through.
Right.
So the city did a DNS on this. They said it's non-significant, and one of the owners of one of the 2 mobile home parks that this is going to apply to has appealed that. So now it's going to be hung up for the next few months in the hearing examiner going through. And if the hearing examiner comes back and says, no, there really are impacts to this, and there may be, because this mobile home park is built on top of a former landfill. It's got methane emissions, right? And the city and their DNS basically blew all that off, right?
Wow.
So they could come back and say, yeah, there's real impacts here that you need to actually go explore more carefully, because if you put part of what they're trying to do with this and say, there are a bunch of setbacks. If you redevelop the site by more than 25%, then suddenly all these new regulations apply.
Kick in.
So what does that mean if suddenly there is mitigation that needs to happen for the methane leak,
right?
Methane emissions from this site? they may have to go back and really do the full
Yeah.
environmental impact statement on this,
And,
right?
and can I wanted to pry a little bit further on this, Kevin, this whole idea of getting an overlay district like this in place. How does this affect other zoning discussions in the future? Because I think about setting this aside, maybe some sort of precedent being set here. If these these mobile homes are allowed in this overlay district, could they be allowed in other parts of Seattle, or how's that going to affect that? I know there aren't a ton of mobile homes here, but I think it's a very interesting discussion about how these different decisions about zoning are pigeonholed in different parts of the city.
Yeah, they are. That's a very interesting part of this. The city has no zoning designation for mobile home park,
Right,
right?
right.
This is where these two actually exist right now, is zone commercial. And in
Yep.
fact, they were upzoned as
Mhm.
part of the MHA,
That's right.
citywide MHA a
Mhm.
couple years ago, which
Yep.
confuses us even more. It's like, well, the city was
Right.
saying that they want this to be redeveloped for more commercial applications. And now
Mhm.
they're saying, oh, no, don't do this. But the other kind
Yeah.
of weird, possibly illegal part of this is that
Mhm.
this could technically be what they call a spot zone.
That's what I was
Where
going
the
to
city
say.
goes
Yeah,
in
yeah.
and rezones a particular
Mhm.
site
Mhm.
to try to sort of make something happen, or to stop something in this case from happening, which
Yeah,
would be redevelopment of it. And
yeah.
spot zones are almost always illegal.
Yeah, yeah, we're just talking about a
So
very specific part in North Seattle here, and it
two
sure smells like
lots,
that to me. Yeah, two
11
spots.
acres, 2 lots,
Yeah,
which are, the only 2 mobile home parks in the entire city.
wow.
And if push comes to shove in court, a judge might find that these are in fact illegal spot zones.
Wow, that's a really interesting discussion. That's a lot bigger than mobile homes. I know that. So we'll see how that plays out over the next couple months here, 6 months to be exact, as we figure out what's going on there. Let's move from affordable housing to homelessness and Compassion Seattle. We're going to talk about that in our next segment. Now, hear this. Okay, so Compassion Seattle, the charter amendment focused on our city's homelessness crisis. This is gathering signatures at a place near you. The title of this measure had been challenged in court. A judge has just cleared that up, so the effort to get this on the ballot in November is underway. What is Compassion Seattle all about? I asked John Scholes of the Downtown Seattle Association about that, and Tiffany McCoy of Real Change. Here's what they said about it on Seattle Channel.
Well, we have a public health crisis in our community in the form of chronic homelessness. We've seen the issue and problem get worse since the start of this pandemic. And it's been nearly 6 years since our city and county declared a state of emergency. We have an emergency. We need to treat it as such.
This is being rolled out as something that will solve the crisis, but it just simply won't. The language gives you that they're going to be able to build housing overnight and that this housing isn't going to cost any money.
And folks, if you want to learn more about some of the different sides of this issue, I really do urge you to watch this show. I was able to moderate on Seattle Channel. We ran it at the end of April, but these are arguments you will definitely hear all the way up through the fall if this makes the ballot. Kevin, let's talk about that process to make the ballot here. Real Change had challenged the language of the title of Compassion Seattle with some other partners in court here. What were they trying to challenge, and what did the judge end up deciding on this?
Yeah, so the way they structure ballot initiatives, and we've talked a lot about ballot title stuff for the recall elections. This is a little different here in this case. There was really kind of no question the ballot initiative would go forward at this point. It was just simply a question of, was the title accurate and reflective of sort of everything that was in the ballot initiative itself. And the challenge said that it was inaccurate on some details. It didn't include, under the state constitution, it's supposed to actually tell you everything that's in there, which is hard because the short title is basically 10 words. Yeah. And the longer title is 75 words.
Yeah, that's not a lot of room.
Yeah. So it's hard to really kind of talk about everything. So they end up with kind of general titles, and they have to mention some parts of this, that are sort of the most relevant parts. The case on this says they don't actually have to list every single specific thing that's in it.
Yes.
But they have to mention things so that an informed reader, informed voter will be put on notice to go look more into it.
Right.
Put on notice being sort of the key word that they use there, right?
Yeah.
So there's a big argument about that. The judge ended up changing like about 5 words in it and said, it's good. And it goes on from there, right?
Right.
What's going to happen later after, assuming this passes, assuming the voters pass it, which, it's hard to say whether they will not. Assuming it passes, then there could still be challenges in court later about whether it's actually legal or not.
Yeah.
In most cases, courts won't decide that
Until it's actually,
before the vote actually, before the election actually happens.
Yeah.
They decide that those issues after the election.
I want to stay with that issue, but I need to jump back to one here in terms of actually support for this or whatever else. Where do you think that support's going to come from? How is it going to impact other races for mayor, city council, maybe even city attorney? Some thoughts about that with Compassion Seattle.
Yeah, so it's interesting. There are a lot of people asking, how is this charter amendment going to affect these other elections?
Yeah.
I actually think the more interesting question is the reverse. How are those other elections going to affect the charter amendment?
Okay.
I don't think anybody's.
Yep.
I don't really necessarily think anybody's going to go to fill out their ballot this year because of the charter amendment.
Okay.
Right?
Okay.
There's certainly a bunch of people that are that feel like City Hall really hasn't responded appropriately to the homeless crisis, and I'd like to see them step up. But I'm not sure that's going to drive anybody to the ballot box, right?
Right.
But I think, since they're aiming for the November election, right, which has the mayor's race, has two citywide city council races on it, I think there's going to be a pretty high turnout for that. And city attorney, I think there's going to be a pretty high turnout. So, I think the interesting question is, in a low turnout election, how would the results for a charter amendment like this be different than for a high turnout election, which will likely be in November?
Right. And I wanted to take it one step further, because if indeed Compassion Seattle did pass, how would it get interpreted by city leadership? Because this almost feels like that discussion we always have with a council appropriates money for a certain project, the mayor doesn't spend it. How does a charter amendment like this actually get implemented? I think there's a lot of devils in those details there.
Yeah, one of the reasons they're doing this as a charter amendment instead of just a regular old ballot initiative is that they can impact the budget. And they're saying, they say in this 12% of the budget has to be spent on homeless and human services issues.
And also it would not allow the council to reverse it. If it were indeed reversed in the future, that would have to happen with another public vote. But keep going with this idea here about.
But so what that means for the city council is if they pass a budget that doesn't do that, they're violating the city charter. Right. And that would make them eligible for recall. Right.
So they don't want to do that. But help me out with that thought there. How do you think this would get interpreted, would get enacted if it indeed did pass? Because we've got a city government that's not doing a lot of the things, apparently, that Compassion Seattle is wanting to do here. And now they're saying, okay, charter says you do it now, but is there going to be some oversight there from the community? How do you see this actually playing out?
I think it's really unclear. I think that's one of the big questions around this is, will there really be any teeth to this? So right now, in order to meet that 12% of the budget guideline, they'd only need to add about $16 million to the human services and homeless budget, right? Which is, that's a rounding error in the city's $1.5 billion general fund budget and $5 billion, entire budget. So adding $16 million, that's not going to bend anybody out of shape. Right. So, I think the harder part is going to be the requirement to build 2,000 units of affordable housing in the first year, right? Because moving that fast in 2,000 units is going to be really hard. We've never done it before in the city.
No, and waiving those land use requirements to get that done, that's a big piece of that. Also making sure the behavioral services are added in there as well. I know that's going to be something that would need to ramp up very quickly. And
especially because the city doesn't do behavioral services. It relies on the county to do that. So that's an entirely new muscle that the city would actually have to develop to be able to go do that.
This is going to be a really interesting debate going forward. Looking forward to see what happens with these signatures being gathered. And they need 33,060 of them by June 25th. So the race is on here. We'll see what happens over the next month here. I want to follow up on another story, Kevin, that we've been talking about for the last couple of weeks. The pink umbrella incident from June of last year, when Seattle police deployed pepper spray, blast balls, tear gas at a protest on Capitol Hill. So the Office of Police Accountability, as we've reported, found the supervisor on scene to be responsible, but then Interim Chief Adrian Diaz reversed that decision and now has announced he has demoted one of his assistant chiefs in connection with this and other protests too. Kevin, you covered this in SCC Insight. You were able to confirm who the chief was talking about in this case. What have you found out here?
Yeah, so he's demoted Assistant Chief Steve Herjak,
Mhm.
and there was this controversy over when Chief Diaz did this. Had he done his own investigation? Was
Mhm.
there information that he had that the OPA director didn't have when he
Mhm.
reached his decision to find a lower level supervisor at fault in this?
Mhm.
And Diaz kind of mumbled through an explanation of no, there's no other information. And he said, what he really did here was he looked at not just this one incident, the pink umbrella,
Mhm.
but that Herjak was incident commander for several days right around there,
Right.
and
End
he
of May,
looked at
start of
kind of
June.
the
Mhm.
he looked at the totality of his performance across that and said that it was unacceptable,
Hmm.
and that he no longer has sort of faith in his abilities to serve in that capacity, and demoted him.
And with that demotion, does this resolve this case in your mind when it comes to holding somebody accountable for these actions? Or I don't know, is there another shoe to drop
I,
here? What do you think?
I think that's what Chief Diaz is
Is
hoping
hoping.
at this point. At this point, though, remember the investigations into
Mhm.
what happened, the protests last summer, has to be done within 180 days of a complaint, right?
Yeah.
And we're coming up at the end of May of 2021 now.
Mhm.
You know, with very few, there are a couple cases where there was an exception made to the 180-day rule,
Yeah.
but in almost all of the cases, it's expired, right?
Yeah.
So we're not going to really see any new investigations
Wow.
of what happened last summer unless some new information, new complaints come out at this point. And we're probably not going to see a lot of that. So
Wow.
this is really starting to wrap up at this point, right?
Yeah.
What we've seen is pretty much what's going to happen.
Wow. I'm interested to see how Councilmember Lisa Herbold, who's head of the Public Safety Committee on the council, is going to do about this. But I guess you're right. She doesn't have a lot of recourse at this point because there's no legal recourse for these investigations to continue, is kind of what you're saying.
Yeah, and she sent me a couple notes of
Oh,
questions
good.
that
Okay.
she still has
I can hear you
here.
clicking away. What do we got?
What are the concerns and observations about planning, logistics, communications, and decision making and staffing analyses? How
Yeah.
did those result in the decision? Issues raised by the OPA. We need clarity on what those issues are. These sound like systemic issues, might not be solved by one demotion.
Yep. That's
You
Communication
know,
Central at Kevin's place. Here we go. Yep.
Yeah. Chief's letter points to the importance of the OIG's planned
Yeah.
supervisor communications audit. So
Mhm.
she's kind of digging into the details of like, okay, procedurally, is this really like, how is our accountability system working?
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Is everybody getting the information that they need?
Mhm.
Are we doing the right kind of investigations? Who's doing those investigations? Is that the right
Yeah.
people? Are we
Yeah.
back to SPD investigating themselves?
Oh
When the
boy.
whole point of
Yeah.
having OPA and OIG
Mhm.
was to have a group external to
Mhm.
SPD do those investigations.
Civilian
so she's
oversight.
really digging into a bunch of
Mhm.
those issues.
Okay, great. Good to know. Thank you for that follow-up, Kevin. We'll continue to follow this case and see what happens in the Public Safety Committee too. But right now, let's move on to our next segment here. What's next? So, Kevin, we are all anxiously awaiting that date of June 30th when our state is supposed to reopen more fully as we make our way out of the COVID pandemic. But over the next couple of weeks, the city is going to start shutting down its mass vaccination sites and move towards more of a mobile vaccination model. So we're talking about North Seattle, West Seattle, Lumenfield, Rainier Beach, all shutting down by June 23rd. That Soto drive-through testing and vaccination site, that's going to stay open. But the reason behind this, Kevin, about 75% of Seattle's population aged 12 and over have received at least one dose of vaccine. That's the good news here. But the city is still missing some people. And I'm trying to figure out, and I know you've written about this, where are they and how has the city reached them?
Yeah, so we've got about 25% left, and that
Mhm.
25% is that's going to be harder to get at. And you
Yeah.
could really kind of think of it as four groups, right? There is the vaccine indifference group,
Yep.
mostly sort of transit to a younger group. They're like, hey, I'm young, I'm not at high risk of
Mhm.
getting,
Sure.
problems with this. So, I might get around to it, I might not. There's the vaccine resistant. The people have been, listening to the conspiracy theories, just like, no, I want this. The vaccine ineligible, people who are immunocompromised
Mhm.
or have some other health reason why they can't take the vaccine. They might
Right.
be allergic to some of the ingredients in it. And then there are people who are just not mobile, who
Yeah.
cannot get
Right.
to some other place to get it, right?
Yep.
So the city is looking at new tactics to try to reach that last 25%. That's why they're putting more resources next month into mobile, right? So they can do pop-ups in different places. So they can go, to places, they can bring the vaccine to people instead of having people come to the vaccine.
And I thought it was interesting in terms of where people are not getting vaccinated as much. The U District had some numbers that were pretty low, and Pike Pine also. So geographically, there were some issues there specifically where you had mentioned it too. Maybe you put some pop-ups there, or that's where the mobile units should go.
I think, if you look at the kind of the Pike Pine Central area, Madrona kind of area right there, where there's 20,000 people who are unvaccinated still there.
Yeah.
Maybe more than just a mobile, maybe like 2 to 3 weeks. In fact, I talked to some folks in the mayor's office. They said they considered having a site there for a month to try to, get to a bunch of those folks, right?
Yeah.
In the U District, Laurelhurst, Sandpoint group, I think it's less about Laurelhurst and probably much more about the U District and a bunch of students there who would maybe that vaccine in different group. And Sandpoint, which has an elderly community and has some underserved minority groups there, where we doing some some pop-ups over there might actually really help get to some folks who otherwise would not be able to get there. And part of this, you also have to think about we have to look at, we talk about food deserts, right? Where are there places in the city we can't get
where are the
fresh
vaccine
food?
deserts?
Are there vaccine deserts in the city now where there, because there's a lot of drugstores that are offering the vaccines. There's a lot of other places that are offering the vaccines. Where in the city are there places where you can't walk into a drugstore and get a vaccine?
Got it. And that's going to be the issue. Working with those private partners, I guess, and also trying to reach out to, I know, a number of Black people in Seattle, a number of Hispanic people. They're also reaching out with a cultural lens on this too, to try to bring in those different people into the mix. And Kevin, I think just looking ahead here, a final point on this, I think this is going to be a slower process as we go through here. We might not see as big gains, I guess, but this is going to be something that's going to be happening over the next several months as the city tries to do this outreach.
Absolutely. The mass vaccination sites are great. That's a very efficient solution to get vaccinations to a lot of people. And that works really well for the first 75%. And this last 25% is going to be much slower going. We're not going to see the same kind of progress that they saw. It's going to be small numbers here, small numbers there. If they have more mobile teams and maybe they can, get to more people than just, one or two teams like they have right now, but it is going to be absolutely slow going.
Yeah. Well, great. We always like to wrap up our show here, folks, with a major issue of concern, that perfect treat to go with your coffee break here. Kevin, I think we might be talking about the jam session that's going on in the Schofield kitchen, because I know you're working on making some jam, but I wanted to make sure I introduced the pride of Milwaukee. Come on in. My nieces, Honor and Mary, are here. We're talking about Seattle News royalty here. Kevin Schofield here, guys.
Oh, please.
No. But I think the girls and I are going to go out and eat our weight in frozen custard here pretty soon, because that's just what uncles do. But anything cooking, do you have that jam going in the kitchen right now, or what's up?
Last weekend, I made like 15 jars of jam. My entire fridge is just like jam with jam. Yeah. It is jam with jam. Tomorrow is going to be my big baking day. I am going to do, if I get really ambitious, chocolate cake, scones.
Love it.
I've got a whole bunch of stuff. Tomorrow is going to take the whole day. I'm going to spend in the kitchen and just bake all day.
Okay. Well, if you could send some of those quality products out here to Milwaukee, I think the girls would appreciate it.
Is that cool? Push it through the Zoom session over to you.
Yeah, right. We'll get it out here somehow. Thank you, girls, for making it happen here. Thank you, Kevin, as always, for making this happen.
Congratulations, Honor.
Honor, congrats. You bet. Honor just graduated from high school. Woohoo! Yeah, looking good there. Thanks, Honor. And thank you, Kevin. Thank you also to our patrons here. I really appreciate you powering our show here as we complete yet another session of Seattle News, Views, and Brews, where you can always find out what's brewing in local politics. Subscribe on iTunes, Spotify, wherever you listen. Again, please do become a patron on Patreon if you like what you're hearing. We really could use your support. Finally, thanks for watching on Converge Media as well. Farewell from Milwaukee and Seattle. We will see you next time.
Seattle News, Views, and Brews is an independent production of Callanan Media Services. Copyright 2021.